Hi, welcome to the Bathtub. You know who this is, the old masturbator. This is the COVID-free masturbator, Scott Bradfield. And we're doing a bunch of these very quickly because we're catching up with all the piles of junk lying around the house since we were preparing to do some talks, and then we had the COVID, and then I started reading more during the COVID, and then I got rid of the COVID. At least I'm very close to getting rid of the COVID. And we're kind of catching up. Okay, so this is I'm not wearing the same shirt because I don't ever change my clothes. I always want to warn people that because you'll see me do these for a week or two, and I'm going to run a bunch of these. I'll probably post a few of these pretty quickly, just so I can catch up with all the stuff in the house. This one is we do a bunch of different kind of theme shows where we're reading. They're not reading projects. They're kind of reading adventures or reading sojourns or whatever you want to call them. And one of them is to read through the work of my old friend Avram Davidson, and not only as a writer, but as an editor. So Avram was an editor of fantasy and science fiction over a 3-year period, I believe ending in 64. 62, 63, 64 or something. And I have about a year, the last year of his editing F&SF. I picked them up on eBay for pretty cheap, pretty decent shape, not mint, but pretty decent shapes. And this is February of 1964. Okay, cool old magazine. I love the old digest size stuff. I grew up as a kid. I'd go to the library and read these in the library. And then we read one of his books, because reading through Avram's books, which I found they're sometimes quite difficult, sometimes quite challenging, sometimes quite fun, particularly his short stories, but always require a lot of attention. You can't, like Lafferty, he reminds me a lot of R.A. Lafferty. You really got to be paying attention or you get lost very quickly in Avram Davidson's story. And the intelligence and the extent of the information that comes at you through the story it can be very challenging. Anyway, we're reading the Kar-Chee. I read the Kar-Chee reign actually a couple months ago, and then never caught up with it as far as doing a piece or talk about it. And we did that because it was the reverse side. Look at this. I mean, is this a cool double ace double or not? I think it's Ursula K. Le Guin's first novel. It's kind of a patch up, and I liked it. We talked about this on a SF classic SF vintage paperback roundup or whatever the heck we call them. We talked about it a while back. I liked it more than I thought. I like Le Guin a lot. And on the other side, I kept it on the shelf because I thought, well, let's just read Avram's old book in here. I've had it for all my life pretty much, and I haven't read it. It's an early novel of Avram's. It turns out the Kar-Chee reign, I'm pretty sure, is a sequel to Rogue Dragon. And I'm pretty sure it is. They've been published together in a single volume. And I have not read Rogue Dragon. It's a cool paperback. I haven't shown it here. But I read this by itself, just on its own. And it's like everything of Avram's. It's just filled with humor and smarts and erudition and narrative. It's just energy. It just fizzes with new. Every scene and chapter just swings off on all sorts of interesting ideas, and there's lots of comedy about the absurdities of religion in this. The basic premise of this book, is the idea of this kind of alien race of insects. They're kind of like the Kar-Chee, are kind of these mindless insects. They seem to be coming down and just tearing up the planet and turning it into like almost a honeycomb of its to extract whatever it is it wants to extract from the earth. And in the course of it, it kind of treats the human beings there as almost vermin. They don't even notice the human beings. All human society has been just evolved and crushed. And this story is basically, again, it may carry on from the previous book, but it's about a series of some of the survivors, and then some of the survivors meet this kind of religious commune group of basically nutballs, and their adventures getting across this world. It reminds me a lot. In fact, let me see if I can get it quickly. Because we plan everything. We plan everything at the Bathtub to a T. We really, nothing happens here that isn't totally planned. Okay, let's not fall over. It reminded me a lot of Tom, our old buddy Tom Dish's The Genocides. I think I get a lot of people writing me about The Genocides. Tom Dish, Tom's first novel. I really need to get a nicer copy of this, which is nice. Well, of course, this comes out a year after, so it could have had some influence on Tom, or I don't know. Tom's pretty cynical too, which is very similar in the sense that the human race is basically considered by this alien intelligence as just like vermin that live in the cornfield, and they don't care. They don't care anything about us. Anyway, that's the sort of upshot of this whole novel and what happens in it. There's a little brief thing. What the kind of realization of the characters is that there's these religious groups that go, oh, they must be the devils. These are the devils coming to our planet to destroy us, and they're here because we've been evil. And so the religious people try to come up with some lesson. And there is no lesson according to the smart people in this book. And there's one little brief passage just to give a flavor. And one of the characters says to another, "Is it possible for you to consider not to accept?" That may be asking too much. But just for a moment to consider the possibility that the Kar-Chee have other functions besides that of being devils in regard to sinful mankind. Just make believe for a moment. Can you do that? Make believe that the Kar-Chee are living creatures like we are, and that they have come here for a purpose of their own which hasn't got anything to do with us. Neither with us here, nor any other men or women anywhere else. Make believe, pretend, that it isn't to punish that they've come here, but on a purpose, which would be the same if we had all died long ago. So it has nothing to do with their lives. It's kind of quite a perfectly sensible way of looking at this invasion by these creatures, which they just don't care about us. They're not reacting to us. It has nothing to do with us. Anyway, the book is filled with intelligence, really bright, very intelligent, very sharp, some beautiful passages and paragraphs. I would prefer, I still, of those early novels, I still prefer Clash of Star Kings, which we talked about already. It kind of by itself is just such a little perfect, little crazy, little short novel. But it's certainly, for those of you who like Avram stuff, and most of you should, you'd really find him interesting. It's worth trying after you've gotten through a lot of short stories. Anyway, Avram was also an editor. Cheers, Cold Mountain Water. Thoroughly unpixelated, just like the old Master Bather. Thoroughly unpixelated. This issue, so I've been trying to read the entire issues of fantasy and science fiction that Avram edited. And it's kind of an interesting project because, first of all, I found one story in here, which is the title story that Avram edited this magazine, called The House by the Crabapple Tree, which sounds like some sort of little charming little fantasy or whatever. This is the picture of the cover. And these are kind of these mutant thugs that wander this kind of post-apocalyptic landscape, basically tormenting and torturing and stealing from people. This is one of the darkest stories I've ever read in my life. It is as dark as The Road. It's probably darker than Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and funnier, because it is just a totally black humor story. And this is the woman, one of the people they're torturing by making her dance on these fires. And it's about this kind of a night. It's almost a Hills Have Eyes sort of story, only it's funny. And the language, it's got a guy named S.S. Johnson. I don't know his name except for association with this story. Avram gives it a great intro. He leads off the collection. He leads off the issue with this story, and it really makes you wonder. Avram was a good editor. One thing I have after I've only read 3 of these issues, and I've read some of his anthologies, but I think this is a really brilliant 3-year period of editors. So there's a lot of wonderful editors at F&SF, including my old one, Gordon Van Gelder. And there have been a lot of good ones over the years, including Anthony Boucher and so forth. But Avram did it, and Ed Furman did this wonderful job for 20 years. But this 3-year period is really worth checking out. And that story is horrific and really funny. And he doesn't let up. A lot of times they have these really black humor comic stories, and they kind of make something nice at the end. This is just nothing nice at all. Nothing nice happens in the story, but it's still funny. And it is one of the most memorable stories I've ever read in F&SF. It's followed by a kind of P.M. Hubbard. He was kind of associated with horror writers in the 60s. It's a kind of type of British fiction where you're out in the countryside and you're on the fells or somewhere out in sheep territory and they discover something. I don't remember the story very well. It was well done. It wasn't my type of story. There's an article. There's a There's a poem by Harry Harrison. The second best story in here is Ron Goulart. Many of the old SF fans like us, like myself, remember Ron Goulart, who used to publish novel after novel after novel. Every month you go to the drugstore, there'd be 2 new Ron Goulart novels. And lots of spin-offs, like Doc Savage's, and he did spin-offs of Vampirella and so forth. Anyway, this story is very funny. It's called Nobody Starves. It's very 60-ish. It's basically a comedy on social welfare, about how unemployment and how people get fired and how the computers are supposed to take care of you. There's a lot of stories in that period where the computers are supposed to be feeding you and all they're giving you is paper. Very good little story, second best story in the book. A weird story by a guy named Dean McLaughlin. I never read him. Not weird. It's a kind of very science fiction. How do we get the spaceship through the warp factor or something or other? And I think I actually gave up on it, not because it was bad, but because it wasn't my kind of story. Isaac Asimov was always in these. He was the science editor. He would write a science article. When I read these, I do exactly what I did when I was a kid, which is I read the first 3 or 4 pages where Isaac Asimov tells some funny story about going to a convention or being on a TV show. And it's just kind of a charming little story talk. And the joke is that he's a genius and everyone's idiots. And he makes this joke about how he's an egomaniac. And it's very funny. And then he goes into a science article, which this one was just called A Slowly Moving Finger. How long can people live? It's about how life expectancy, how much it could be changed over the course of history, and what can science do about it. And I get about 2 pages into the science part, and I totally lose interest. That's just me. But they're really cool. There's a funny novelette in here, which strikes me as very paradigmatic F&SF from my memory, by someone, Evelyn E. Smith, which is sort of a takeoff. It's kind of a science fiction version of like Jane Eyre or Rebecca or something, where it's this woman doesn't this woman have to go off and take care of some alien robot or something? I forget now, but I don't remember. I read it a month or 2 ago or a few weeks ago. I just really enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down, really. It was just a fun, weird little science fiction puzzle story with a kind of comic central idea about raising this robot. And then there's what's really cool in Avram's period, which is the book section. He does a lot of cool things with the book section. The most interesting of which is he doesn't just do genre SF, which most of these magazines do, books that are published as SF. He starts off with Graham Greene's really interesting, slightly fantastic collection of stories, A Sense of Reality, which is filled with kind of fantastic borderline fantasy stories. And Avram writes most of these short reviews himself. And they are all signed. But he has different people, and lots of interesting people write in there. So, for example, we have a radio astronomy for amateurs, intelligent life in space. These paperbacks I used to buy as a kid. These paperbacks about whether there's life in this space, outer space, or not. And then really strange, off the path horror and weird tales books. Dion Fortune, I don't know who he is. Patrick Moore was a big old. It's actually fun to read them, and Avram's little reviews are great. They're really very funny and punchy, and they really give you a little bit of information. I really like his Who Fears the Devil, Manly Wade Wellman, an old Arkham House collection of horror stories, The World of Flying Saucers. He does a lot of books, which is what I like about this book column. And then he signs one, and then he does another one. I don't know who Walter Breen is, but he reviews a book by C.G. Jung on archetypal fantastic stories. Cool little. I really like I look forward to getting to the book section. Burning Spear was real. Okay, this is what's fun about reading issue by issue. Burning Spear by Kit Denton. I take that back. That was the second best story for me. Along with The House on Crabapple Road, The House by the Crabapple Tree. I thought that was a brilliant little story. It's about a little kid who thinks he's taken a sliver of sunlight that's come through the window, and he's taken it and he's put it in the closet or something. And it's a really weird little fantasy story, beautifully done. The sort of thing you really did see a lot in F&SF that weren't really genre writers writing genre stories. It was kind of really Shirley Jackson territory. Interesting books. An essay by Wilson Tucker, who I remember really enjoying his science fiction. It's just basically about going to a convention or something, which is kind of interesting. And then one story called by Doris Pitkin Buck, who used to always write for the F&SF, and for some reason I didn't get interested in that story. I don't think that's one of the only stories I didn't finish. And then you get to letters. The whole magazine's kind of fun to read. It's a little time history, including going into Marketplace. I remember reading these as a kid, which is where people would sell fanzines and so forth. And then what else did they sell? Coin collectors and all sorts of hypnotism. There's like half of it's hypnotism. As a kid, I remember thinking, maybe I should become a hypnotist because I couldn't do anything else. Yeah, become a hypnotist. And stamp collecting and then miscellaneous. Anyway, really, I think this is a really kind of a brilliant issue of F&SF, and I think Avram's period over there at that magazine rewards investigation. There's some stories I would never have read if I weren't on this kind of weird little side quest here. Okay, stay safe. Avram Davidson, good old friend, good old buddy. You reminded me every time I was sick, whenever I'm sick, as I was in the past week. I remember when I was like 18, I lived down the street from him. I rented a place near him in this cool part of San Francisco called the Richmond District, and I was not in my best period of my life, but I remember I'd go to bed like 4 or 5 in the morning and wake up at noon. That time of period of your life, and when Avram would come over with his dog Herman, he'd come over sometimes to go for walks. He'd come over at 12 or 1 o'clock, and I'd still be in bed, and he used to say to me, "I'm sorry I have awoken you from your feculent slumber." And then he'd laugh. And every time I feel sick, I think, I'm in my feculent slumber. Anyway, great old Avram Davidson, wonderful editor, wonderful period of F&SF. Stay safe.